This video will help you to complete the notes that are going to go into your notebook on page 37. We are using packet page 38. I'm going to write that down. You don't have to. Packet page 38 on notebook page 37. So I'll just, oops, there we go. Now you can see it. So packet page 38 on notebook page 37, that's what we're working on. And we're talking about carbohydrates today. Carbohydrates, remember we said the other day, they are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They are used mostly for energy. There's some that are for structural support, like in the cell walls, but mostly this is our energy molecule. And we get all of our organic molecules, carbohydrates included, from the foods that we eat. So if we think of them in terms of, when we say carbs, right, we think of bread and pasta and sugar. Okay, so that's what we think of with carbohydrates. That's where we get our carbs. Carbohydrates are a type of organic molecule that we talked about the other day. That's on your chart that you're working to memorize. And one thing that we need to be able to do is always recognize carbohydrate. So not only by what it looks like, but also sometimes by the name. So one that we talk a lot about is glucose, right? Because that's the what's made in photosynthesis. It's what the mitochondria uses to make ATP. But all carbohydrates end in, or not all, most carbohydrates end in ose. So examples like glucose and cellulose, okay, they end in ose. So if you ever hear another one that maybe you have, there's a ton. So you may hear like galactose or lactose or sucralose. You may not have ever heard of them before, but just because they end in ose, you can be like, oh, those are carbohydrates. Ose, just kind of as an aside, that I guess it's a suffix, right? That comes at the end means sugar. Okay, that's what that means. Okay, so we need carbohydrates for a number of reasons. We need them for short-term energy storage. Okay, so remember long-term energy storage that you're going to keep around for a long time, that's what we use fat for, and we put that extra glycogen in those fat cells. But short-term energy storage, those are going to be carbohydrates. And for when we're storing it, looks a little bit different in plants versus animals. In plants, plants make what's called starch. And that's where they store, for short term, that extra energy until it's needed by the plant. So if a plant makes a bunch of sugar during photosynthesis but isn't going to use all of it all at once, it'll store it for short term as starch. Animals do something similar. They store it as glycogen. And it's important that you know that plants make starch, animals make glycogen. It's very like me to ask you that on a test someday. The cell wall in plants, so this is a structural example of a carbohydrate. The cell wall in plants is made of the sugar cellulose. Okay. We need carbohydrates for those uses, okay? Remember just a couple more terms that are important to think of. Remember, these carbohydrates are made of building blocks, and the name of the fancy name for that was monomer. Okay, so a monomer is a building block. We said it's like an individual Lego brick, and you put many of them together to make a polymer. The monomer of carbohydrates is a monosaccharide. Okay, and they look like rings, right? They look like rings. or the way I remember them is I think of donuts. Okay, so we would have, without putting in all the carbons and the oxygens and stuff, it would be kind of a ring like this, usually with a little thing. That would be a monosaccharide. If I have two of them, that would be a disaccharide. If I have more, you just keep adding them on. You could have a polysaccharide. Okay, so they would look like those donut rings. We get our carbohydrates from the food that we eat, but it's important that you know where carbohydrates come from in the first place. And we rely on plants to make carbohydrates for us. Okay, and they make them in that process of photosynthesis. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk more over the next couple of days about photosynthesis and respiration as well. All right, so glucose is the food of plants, which is a sugar. Right. It is a monosaccharide, so it is a very simple sugar. It is a one ring sugar. Plants can't go out to McDonald's, right, and go through the drive-through to get their food and get their energy to make their energy. They have to make their own sugar. They can't move around, and they do that through a process called photosynthesis. This is the process in which plants make sugar, food, using energy from the sun. And the formula for this looks like this. Now I'm going to add some numbers in here to balance this out a little bit. It actually takes 6 molecules of CO2, which is carbon dioxide, and 6 molecules of H2O, which is water. If you don't know what that is, let's write that under there. Carbon dioxide, water. And it uses sunlight, and the sunlight is the energy source. Okay, so it uses that sunlight energy, radiant energy it's called, to transform this. It breaks the bonds in the carbon dioxide and breaks the bonds in the water and kind of rearranges all of those carbons and oxygens and hydrogens and forms a molecule of glucose, C6H12O6. Remember, carbon, C is carbon, H is hydrogen, O is oxygen. And we see that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio because we see that with carbohydrates. So it makes a molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen, O2. Okay. So when we look at chemical reactions, we see that there's stuff on this side and then there's this arrow. And then there's stuff on the other side. There's a special name for that because there's special names for everything. If we look at the left-hand side, these are kind of the ingredients. The fancy name for that is reactants. These are the things that react together to give us what we're going to get at the end of the reaction over on the right-hand side, which is called the products. It always goes that way. So we've got reactants and the arrow, and I always was taught to say yields, like gives you products. And every chemical reaction reads that way. So once you learn that, like that'll help you when you go on and take chemistry or physical science. Chemical reactions go from left to right and in that direction of that arrow. So just to make sure we have it, the reactants are the ingredients for photosynthesis. You need carbon dioxide, which is CO2. You need water, H2O, and you need sunlight. That's the energy source. You get glucose, C6H12O6. That's glucose. I don't often ask you to remember chemical formulas, but glucose is one that you should know. C6H12O6. It's important. So I would memorize that one. And you get oxygen, O2. Okay, so that's the reactants and the products. In a plant, photosynthesis happens in the leaf. Okay. And in the cell, a plant cell, photosynthesis happens, if you remember, in the chloroplast. So if you have big leaves and lots of chloroplasts, that will help a plant to more efficiently perform photosynthesis. Okay, so if you're a plant and you've got big leaves, you have lots of chloroplasts, you're going to be making lots and lots of sugar. Think about like a banana tree. If you've ever seen them before, they have really big, broad leaves, and that's where they're able to do a lot of photosynthesis and make enough sugar to have a very sugary fruit like a banana, right? So anyway, make sure that you put this page into your notebook on page 37. Your assignment for today is to take a picture of this once it is complete and upload it for classwork credit. So make sure that you do that. I hope you have a wonderful day. Let me know if you have any questions.